How does Jeff Goldblum stay inspired?
Well, in many ways, I like to play music, of course, and
Sure.
but I do find myself coming back to this quote by George Bernard Shaw. Let me see if I can remember it. He says, "This is the true joy in life, the being used for a purpose considered by yourself as mighty, the being a force of nature instead of a feverish, selfish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. I am of the opinion that my life belongs to the whole community, and while I live, it is my privilege to do for it whatever I can. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die, for the harder I work, the more I live. I rejoice in life for its own sake. Life is no brief candle to me. It's a sort of splendid torch that I've got hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations."
Few men entertained or outraged the world as he did. As a playwright, he created many extraordinary characters. But the most remarkable role was the one he invented for himself.
Ladies and gentlemen, I suppose you know that this is a fake. You all imagine that this is perfectly natural, that I'm coming just to get into the airplane. But it's all a put-up job. And the whole point of this is that you should see the animal for a moment. Well, you have seen him. I've nothing whatever to say to you, except that I'm sure you're very glad to see me, and I'm extremely sorry that I can't see you. Good morning.
His name is George Bernard Shaw, and this is his biography. I'm Mike Wallace. This is Biography. Our story, George Bernard Shaw. Shaw was the most celebrated, and to many the greatest playwright of his time. But he was too extravagant a personality to be satisfied with this solitary distinction. "I am," he said matter-of-factly, "a philosopher, novelist, sociologist, statesman, dramatist, and theologian." And, he added, "an Irishman, a vegetarian, a fanatic, and a fluent liar." George Bernard Shaw once confessed, "I love to leave fire and desolation in my path, to create the impression that I am a terrible fellow."
I've been here before. I told you what to do and you haven't done it. And you're up to your neck in trouble, in consequence.
Shaw bristled with hostility, but he camouflaged it with laughter. In order to gain a hearing, he said, it was necessary for me to become a lunatic, a jester. It was a role that he played for almost an entire century, beginning in Dublin, Ireland, where he was born in 1856. Shaw's father, George Carr Shaw, is a total failure. By day, he loses money in business ventures. At night, he is an amiable drunkard. Shaw's mother, Bessie, neglects the family and spends most of her time singing in amateur choruses. A strange bohemian by the name of Vandeleur Lee is Mrs. Shaw's singing teacher, and he even lives with the Shaw family. Another familiar figure in the Shaw household is Uncle William, an eccentric clergyman who winds up in an asylum after insisting that he is the Holy Ghost. But Uncle Walter is Shaw's favorite. He frequently storms through the Shaw home, reciting what young George calls unprintable limericks. Raised in this eccentric household, Shaw grows up a strange young man, inwardly shy, outwardly rebellious. Though exceptionally bright, he quits school and tries his hand at a couple of minor jobs. But he calls honest work a sin against my nature. Besides, Shaw has something else on his mind, the far-off city of London. London is a mecca for the wealthy and the cultured. It is a city of opportunity for ambitious young men. At the age of 20, Shaw arrives in London to make his fortune, he says, as a man of genius. In staid Victorian London, the young genius avoids gainful employment and associates with the city's bohemian set. The bohemians share Bernard Shaw's youthful scorn of home and family, flag and country, morals and conventions. Even among these bohemians, Shaw learns how to attract attention. He startles his friends by declaring, "If God really exists, let him prove it by striking dead everyone in this room." Shaw quickly becomes a master at capturing the spotlight by the simple device of shocking people. He has always had a way with words. Now Shaw tries his hand at writing novels. All of them are bad. Within the next 9 years, Shaw will earn $30 as a writer. Shaw's mother rescues him when he is almost penniless. She has come to London to teach singing and to dabble in Ouija boards and communing with the dead. Now she gives him bed and board, helps to support him for the next 20 years. Says Shaw, "I didn't throw myself into the struggle for life. I threw my mother into it." He now develops a new interest, politics. And though he has trouble with his own financial problems, Shaw decides that socialism is the answer to the economic ills of the rest of the world. Overnight, he becomes famous for his skill as a fiery pamphleteer and debater. At times, the work of Shaw and his fellow radicals, who are called the Fabians, leads to street demonstrations and violence. Shaw, however, says, "I am a thinker, not a fighter. When the shooting begins, I shall get under the bed and not emerge until we come to constructive business." At 29, the intellectual firebrand accepts a job as a music and drama critic. Soon, all of London is talking about the young man who dares to attack, even to ridicule, the greatest writers and composers of his day. Writes Shaw, "There is nothing that soothes me more, after long piano recitals, than to sit and have my teeth drilled by a finely skilled dentist." Beginning to cut a dashing figure in London, Shaw declares that women find him irresistible. The great English actress Ellen Terry, however, fires Shaw's imagination. Years before they meet personally, he sends her passionate letters. Writes Shaw, "Oh, the happiness, the peace of loving my great treasure, Ellen." But when they do meet, Shaw insists that their relationship remain purely platonic. Then, in 1898, an Irish millionairess, Charlotte Payne Townsend, becomes Shaw's intellectual companion and secretary. He calls her the suffragette, Miss Dignity. When Shaw suffers a breakdown from overwork, Miss Dignity eagerly volunteers to be his private nurse and devote herself to him. Shaw remains calm, deciding that he and Miss Townsend have become indispensable to one another. He commands her first to buy a ring and a marriage license. Mrs. George Bernard Shaw and her husband begin their marriage with a unique understanding that they will forsake all romance, all emotion, and be just friends. On their honeymoon, the 42-year-old Shaw falls down a flight of stairs and breaks a few bones. He spends most of his time planning a book about Richard Wagner. Shaw has also begun to write plays that crackle with his irreverent ideas. Now, as a writer, he has found himself. In his first major work, Caesar and Cleopatra, Shaw dares to poke fun at the vanity, the foibles of illustrious figures in history. Man and Superman ridicules conventional morality and shows that in the battle of the sexes, woman is the hunter, man the hunted. The Doctor's Dilemma deals with a profession which, says Shaw, writes absurd prescriptions, promotes unnecessary surgery, and ruthlessly exploits human folly and fear. Pygmalion is a social satire, the story of a Cockney flower girl who is accepted by society as a gracious lady simply because she is made to look like one. St. Joan is Shaw's masterpiece, his eloquent tribute to the individual, to the independent mind in conflict with religion and society. Boasts George Bernard Shaw, I am a specialist in immoral and heretical plays. Shaw confesses that he has a formula for playwriting. The secret of success, he says, is to offend the greatest number of people. And it is this success, this notoriety, that Shaw craves above all. Says one critic, with one eye always cocked on public opinion, Shaw is not a true rebel against the mob, he is a slave to it. Shaw becomes an international figure, made rich by an intrigued public, attacked by censors and clergymen, idolized by rebellious intellectuals. Then, near the height of his fame, Shaw falls in love, in his peculiar way, with another great actress, whom he calls his glorious white marble lady. A star in many of his plays, Stella Patrick Campbell, however, is somewhat bewildered by Shaw's conception of romance. I kiss your hand, writes Shaw, and praise creation for you. And now I shall go to bed and sign myself, O loveliest, doveliest, babiest, your gabbiest, GBS. He even goes so far as to take her photograph in the privacy of her home, but he will go no further. The aging playwright frankly tells Stella, my scalp, the scalp of a Superman, shall not decorate your wigwam. As Shaw nears his 70s, his powers as an artist begin to fade. But Shaw himself in the 1920s emerges as an astonishing figure, a world traveler, social critic, and a cultural institution, part genius, part ham.
Oh, how do you do? Just wait one moment until I come down. Well, here you are, I suppose in a stuffy theater somewhere, munching chocolates and larking with one another. Now, the reason I'm here is that I was born on the 26th of July, 1856. And consequently, you would say that I am 76 years of age today. Now, I think I have said about as much as a man of 76 ought to be allowed to say on his birthday, and I have a lot of work still to do at Malvern. So I know you'll be very kind and you'll excuse me. Bye, goodbye, goodbye.
By the late 1920s, George Bernard Shaw is looked upon as a living immortal, dwelling on his own Mount Olympus. And from such heights, he delights in entertaining and outraging the world.
Ladies and gentlemen, before I plant the tree, I think I shall talk a little.
You could say that later.
Yes, now a gentleman tells me that I am to face this way. Because these gentlemen who are operating They, of course, go to the wrong side. They always do. Shakespeare had a mulberry tree, and I'm not going to be outdone by Shakespeare.
Shaw is aware that to achieve fame years before, he had put on the cap and bells of a jester. Now he will never remove them. He is the voluntary prisoner of his own reputation.
Don't be deceived, ladies and gentlemen. When a man is playing the simple, unaffected human being, in public, he's always acting as hard as he possibly can. And small blame to him, I do that sort of thing myself. I could show you all sorts of tricks that I can play. For instance, if I want to appear to you as the profoundly reflective critic, well, look at this. You get a view of my forehead. My beard is not so conspicuous. You would almost, if you had to vote for a man, and you wanted to vote for a profoundly reflective man, you would vote for me. But would you vote for that?
When one of Shaw's close friends, Lady Astor, comes to the United States, reporters ask her an inevitable question about the world-celebrated playwright. When will Shaw himself visit America?
He's frightened. He's frightened of coming to America. I'm longing to have him come because you'd like him. He'd be very insulting and very amusing.
Finally, however, the great man consents to set sail for the United States. Of Americans, he says, I have called them idiots, and they just adore me. His visit has been eagerly awaited by the American press, which Shaw does not intend to disappoint.
I can't say that I'm very glad to see you because I can't see you. But I feel instinctively that you're extremely glad to see me. They're always glad to see me in America. So now, take a good look at me because I am the actual, real, original Bernard Shaw. And, now, how do you like me? Very good.
In Hollywood, Shaw is lionized. Proudly, he struts with actress Marion Davies. Later, he will confess an irresistible impulse to kiss Mae West. And he will tell producer Samuel Goldwyn, "You, sir, are interested in art, but I am interested in money." Shaw becomes a globetrotter. From Mexico City to Moscow, he graciously permits mankind to behold the legend that is George Bernard Shaw. He continues to sound off on the affairs of the world. In the early 1930s, he praises dictators like Stalin, Mussolini, and Hitler, partly because he never tires of shocking the public, but also because the arrogant Shaw is strangely attracted to tyrants, to self-styled supermen.
Mr. Shaw, after having visited a good part of the world, what do you think should be done to prevent another world conflict?
You see, that's one of these questions that I'm not prepared to ask unless you give me the job. No man fords a stream until he comes to it. If you want me to set the world to rights, you must put me against that so that I've got to do it within 24 hours. Then I'll give my mind to it.
Most people, however, are willing to forgive him almost anything because he is, after all, George Bernard Shaw. He speaks at a dinner given in honor of Albert Einstein, and in Shaw's eyes, it is one giant praising another. Shaw's political views changed somewhat with the start of the Second World War. He deplores the bloodshed unleashed by dictators he had once naively admired. And he has a special grudge about what happened on his 88th birthday, when he was visiting friends near London.
And the first compliment I received was a bomb from Adolf Hitler, which broke my bedroom window. I hope by my next birthday, I shall receive something more cheerful and less exciting. Goodbye, 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 goodbye.
For the rest of his life, however, Shaw will voice great admiration for Joseph Stalin and communism. And Shaw insists that he himself is a devout communist. But at the same time, he has become a millionaire by driving hard bargains for the rights to his plays. Says Shaw, "I will try to die rich," but the tax collector gets nearly everything. The years begin to take their toll on Shaw. But even as he approaches the age of 90, he is still a man to be reckoned with. He continues to write plays and political pamphlets, and he boasts that his vegetarianism may keep him alive forever. Shaw's wife has died, and he is now in the midst of a lively flirtation with a young actress. But as usual, it is only through the mail. In his 90s, Shaw characteristically disagrees with his now worshipful critics. "In my best days," he says, "I was merely one of the 100 best playwrights in the world, hardly a supreme distinction." And he rejects honors and titles. They get one, says he, into disreputable company. But finally, time catches up with the indestructible George Bernard Shaw. He says, "I am weary, utterly weary of everything. I want most intensely to die." To his nurses, he complains, "You are only trying to keep me alive as a curiosity." Shaw warns his doctor, "It will do you no good if I recover." A doctor's reputation, he says, is made by the number of eminent men who die under his care. Shaw will die in 1950 at the age of 94, one of the most incredible personalities of his time. He was his own work of art. He even provided his own curtain speech.
If you'd known all I have had to put up with in my life, you'd say heaven defend me for living that man's life. However, I don't complain. It doesn't matter if one dies poor, which I'm not going to do, by the way, as long as your life is happy. And the way to have a happy life is to be too busy doing what you like all the time, having no time left to you to consider whether you're happy or not. And, oh, look here, I'm getting talking. I must stop. Well, it's very pleasant to have seen you all here, and to think that you are my audience and all that, because I'm a born actor myself. I like an audience. I'm like a child in that respect. Well, goodbye, 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 all of you.
Ever since Shaw's death, critics and historians have been trying to measure his stature as a writer and as a man. But Shaw himself had the best, if not the last, word. He said, "For years, I have been dinning into the public head that I am an extraordinarily witty, brilliant, and clever man. That is now part of the public opinion," said Shaw. and no power on earth will ever change it. Mike Wallace for Biography.
I hate the name George.
And so he became Bernard Shaw. GBS called his house Shaw's Corner, and to his critics it seemed just another example of his colossal conceit. It is an ugly house, an oddly conventional setting for an unconventional genius. But in his day-to-day life, Shaw was a man of routine. In the quiet of the garden and the isolation of his hut, he found the haven he needed. This man who spent his early life in poverty and uncomfortable rooms. He himself remarked, "You know what a French journalist said when he saw my home. I thought I was to meet England's most advanced thinker. And what do I find? A bourgeois interior and Madame who has all the appearance of being your wife." Here are his desk and his typewriter. The story goes that it was quite beyond him to change the ribbon. He used to take the machine to London to get his secretary, Miss Patch, to do it for him. Here is the Oscar he won for the film of Pygmalion, his Nobel Prize, the Bible without which he never traveled, his manuscript notes for St. Joan. Among these books are many that he wrote himself. His literary output, plays, novels, criticism, pamphlets, was prodigious. What are we to make of these frozen, onerous rooms? What can these objects, amassed for our inspection, tell us of the man and his mind? Shall we start, as Shaw might have started a play, with our hero's face, figure, and dress? Of this beautiful bronze, he said, with unaccustomed modesty, that he would go down to posterity as a model whom Rodin considered worthy of a bust. The portrait is by Augustus John. Here he is again, preposterous in his knickerbocker rigart and assorted fads. You can judge a man by his friends. Shaw had many. And Oscar Wilde was less than fair when he sneered, "He has not an enemy in the world, and none of his friends liked him." The still is from a cowboy film. The cast, GBS, G.K. Chesterton, and Alair Belloc. The film was never released. A signed portrait from the greatest film star of them all, who once played the great dictator. And next to Gandhi, Lenin and Stalin. With GBS is Lady Astor and a group of Russian revolutionaries. Shaw's childhood in Dublin was difficult. His father was a drunkard and his mother more interested in singing than in her son. Those early days implanted in him personal habits of extreme simplicity. This is the bedroom of a man who left £400,000. The habit of economy lasted throughout his life. He never sent a letter when a postcard would do. And the postcards have become a legend. He had them ready printed with his views on capital punishment, a scheme for a reformed alphabet, vegetarianism, requests for autographed books, and subscriptions to charities. On the 100th anniversary of Shaw's birth, some friends met at Felix Topolsky's studio. Esme Percy, who acted in the plays, introduces Perlita Nielsen, just beginning her dramatic career. Shaw said about these Topolsky drawings,
If I were not married, I might let you debunk me for the fun of it. But my wife, who admires everything you draw except your pictures of me, would object.
Topolsky continued to draw him and illustrated his books. He describes how he made the illustrations for an edition of Pygmalion.
He and I plunged into the delightful game which we played before, when I did the drawings for Geneva and in good King Charles's golden days. I would draw a collection of not quite right drawings to provoke his criticisms and send them to him. And then he would slash at them with colored pencils and watercolors, redraw them, pasting over pieces of paper and changing the characters even, and would write devastating comments on the margins, yet politely saying in a note accompanying the parcel,
Forgive my barbarous amateur mutilations of your masterly drawings. They are removable.
when I tried, in my initial sketches of the characters, to model them on Mrs. Campbell. He wrote on the margins,
No, no, no. Mrs. Campbell, except in her gutter dress, was wildly unlike Eliza.
and Beerbohm Tree.
No, Tree was not like a human being, much less like Higgins.
GBS was slow in establishing himself as a dramatist, the reason being that his plays were controversial and highly original in style. And it was not until the early 1900s, when he was already 50, that he stormed London with the historic Season at the Court Theatre. His producer was the brilliant Harley Granville Barker. Here is a scene from an early production of Fanny's first play. Shaw himself may be seen in these photographs taken at rehearsals of Mrs. Warren's Profession and Androcles and the Lion. The critics of the time were often anything but complimentary. Of the first production of Great Catherine, it was said that GBS had been writing down to the average Englishman's sense of humor, that it marked a falling off in his creative powers, and that the fine satirist had become a vulgar buffoon. Such criticisms dissolved in the torrent of his success, and a series of gifted actors and actresses appeared in the plays. Gwen Franken Davies, as she appeared in Back to Methuselah, Ellen Terry, Mrs. Patrick Campbell. Outside London, a Shaw festival was started by Sir Barry Jackson.
Heartbreak House, for instance. The play on which he agreed with me was probably the best of the bunch. I think probably the most enduring, the most impressive, was his St. Joan.
The part at St. Joan was first played in London by Dame Sybil Thorndike, seen here with Perlita Nielsen.
The first time I met Shaw, years ago, was when I was sent to read the part of Candida, to see if I'd do for an understudy. Well, I read the part through, with great gusto, thinking I was frightfully good. And when I'd finished, Shaw burst out laughing and said, "Splendid, my dear young lady. You go home and have several children, do all the housekeeping, and you'll be quite a good Candida, but you'll do for the understudy." You know, I agree that the play of St. Joan is his most impressive, and I think the scene that I love the most was the scene in the cathedral at Rheims, where the Archbishop tells her that if she continues in her mission, she will no longer have the support of the church or the army, that she will be left alone.
St. Joan was later played by Wendy Hiller, and Shaw produced it himself, infuriating her by describing how good Sybil Thorndike had been in the part. Wendy Hiller, looking through old photographs, recalls how her first letter from GBS said what a bad actress she was. But he made amends. He insisted that she took the lead in the film of Pygmalion. Here she is as Eliza Doolittle in the tea party scene where she utters the famous line, "Not bloody likely," which so shocked earlier audiences. Professor Higgins was played by Leslie Howard, and the picture was one of the great successes of the British film industry and its distinguished director, Anthony Asquith.
When Gabriel Pascal, Leslie Howard, and I were preparing the script, we all agreed that there must be a scene where one sees Eliza going to the wall, we felt the audience would feel cheated if they weren't allowed to see her moment of triumph. Well, I was delegated with the task of trying to sell the idea to Mr. Shaw. However, I screwed my courage up and told him what we wanted. And his first reaction was to say, "Oh, no, out of the question, impossible." And so I said, "Well, Mr. Shaw, I wonder, would you just let me read you a very rough sketch of what we thought might happen in that scene?" And very reluctantly, he agreed to do that. And so I remember in the scene, as I described it, I said that Eliza comes up the stairs with the frozen calm of a sleepwalker. And for some reason, those two words, frozen calm, tickled his fancy. And I remember him repeating, frozen calm, frozen calm. Yes, yes.
Motion pictures brought Shaw to the world, but already he was honored on the continent and in America. His plays were being performed as far afield as China and Russia, where he was a welcome visitor. An ardent socialist, his humanity overran politics. Listen to a contemporary, Kingsley Martin, editor of the New Statesman.
Bernard Shaw was a very serious man who deceived the public by playing the fool. He did it partly deliberately. He once said, of course, that he had a clown inside him that always tripped him up at critical moments, his greatest moments. But the fact was that he had to call attention to himself and what he had to say, which he thought very important, and he had to call attention by either making people angry or making them laugh. And they simply wouldn't listen to him for a great many years, so the habit of laughter and provocation grew on him. The last time I saw him, I called on him at his home, as I used to do in his later days, and we came out, and then as we went away, he started singing. And he had always had, music had always been one of the most important things in his life, and he began to sing aria from Verdi. And I turned round and looked at him, and he said, "Yes, my voice is no penny whistle even now." And it wasn't. His voice never had been a penny whistle. It was a trumpet for a new world and an exposure of rottenness of all kinds. And when Shaw died, personally I felt very much as I would feel if I were living in a room when suddenly a blind had been drawn down over the window. It's become much darker and a very much stuffier world to live in.
Wherever he went, Shaw was besieged by reporters.
It's no good in this country putting questions of national importance to me. I've been here before. I told you what to do and you haven't done it. And you're up to your neck in trouble in consequence. I told you in New York, I put it to you very carefully and exactly. I told you that what you had in do in this country was to abolish your constitution, which was preventing you from doing anything. And now you see what's happened since.
That way about our Constitution, how do you feel about Mr. Roosevelt?
Well, Mr. Roosevelt, you see what the situation is. You have a good president and you have a bad constitution. And the bad constitution gets the better of the good president all the time. The end of it will be that you might as well have an English prime minister. People ask me, do the English people want a national theatre? Well, of course they don't. They never want anything. They've got a British Museum, but they never wanted it. They've got a National Gallery, but they never wanted it. They've got Westminster Abbey, but they never wanted it. But now that they've got it, now that it stands there as a mysterious phenomenon that came to them in some sort of fashion, they quite approve of it. And they feel that the place would be incomplete without it.
The politicians have not yet found out the microphone. They still imagine that they are addressing political meetings. And they don't understand that the microphone is the most wonderful telltale in the world. If you speak insincerely to a political, say an election audience, the more insincere you are, the more hopelessly you're away from all the facts of life, the more they'll cheer you and the more they're delighted. But if you try that on the microphone has a certain magic. It gives you away instantly. You hear the political ranter. You hear that his platitudes mean nothing and that he doesn't really believe them. And there's something more important. If you nerve yourself to face the microphone by taking, say, half a glass of whiskey, the effect produced is that you're shockingly drunk.
Here now is Colin Wilson, who has written so brilliantly on the intellectual rebels of our time.
It's been very odd for me to listen to these opinions on Shaw by his contemporaries and friends, mainly because, for me, Shaw is very definitely a member of a past generation, and a man who has now been assigned his place in literary history. I never met Shaw. I never even saw Shaw on the films or heard his voice on the radio. So, for me, Shaw is purely someone of the past. I think I and my generation can see Shaw in something of his historical perspective. I feel, quite frankly, that Shaw is one of the most immense figures in world literary history. I believe that another 50 years will see Shaw established as one of the very greatest writers that the world has ever produced. I believe that he is the very greatest writer that England has ever produced, Shakespeare not excepted.
If you'd known all I have had to put up with in my life, you'd say heaven defend me for living that man's life. However, I don't complain. It doesn't matter if one dies poor, which I'm not going to do, by the way, as long as your life is happy. And the way to have a happy life is to be too busy doing what you like all the time, having no time left to you to consider whether you're happy or not. And, oh, look here, I'm getting talking. I must stop. Well, it's very pleasant to have seen you all here, and to think that you're my audience and all that, because I'm a born actor myself. I like an audience. I'm like a child in that respect. Well, goodbye, 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 all of you.
Oh, lady. Well, this is a surprise. Have you all come to see me, ladies and gentlemen? Well, I should never have expected this. Oh, well, it's really extremely kind of you. I'm very glad to see you. You know, I'm very glad you've come, because I like people to see me. I don't know how it is, but people who only know me from reading my books or sometimes even from seeing my plays, get a most unpleasant impression of. And the people who really meet me, as you have been kind enough to meet me now, well, they see that I am a most harmless person. I'm quite a kindly person, you know. But still, it's not necessary for me always to look as genial as I'm trying to look now. Of course, I can put on the other thing, for instance. Now that is what I call my Mussolini studies. They, by the way, I think in justice to Signor Mussolini, I ought to tell you that he has a very wonderful head. He has a wonderful brow which comes down to here. But the difficulty is that he can't take it off. Now, if you watch me, I can put on that imposing look that terrifies you, the Mussolini look. But, now just watch. I can take it off. Now Signor Mussolini cannot take it off. He is condemned, although he is a most amiable man, he is condemned to go through life with that terrible and imposing expression which really does a great deal of injustice to his kindly nature. But I can put it on, and I can take it off, and do all sorts of things. One thing, of course, that I'm very glad that you've all seen me here tonight is that you'll know me when you see me again. Now, I'll tell you something that happened to me the other day. I was at Conway in North Wales. I was in the street. A little girl came over to me. She pulled out an autograph book and she said, "Please give me your autograph." Well, I said, "What do you want my autograph for? I'm not Mr. Lloyd George." "Oh," she said, "I know you're not Mr. Lloyd George." Well, I said, "Now who am I?" And she said, "Oh, I don't know. I've forgotten the name, but my father told me to go and get your autograph." Now, it's quite possible that some little girl who is here on this occasion may imagine that she can get an autograph out of me that way, because I gave that little girl the autograph. But you won't get me a second time, so it's not the slightest use trying that on. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid I'm always an extremely busy man. At least I pretend I am. And I'm afraid I must go back to work. I must say good night. Oh, by the way, stop. This may be a matinee. Good night may not be the right thing to say. However, call it good afternoon, good day, and anyhow, goodbye and good luck. Good luck. Well, you may take it from me that the news from Germany is the very best news that we have had since the war. Ever since 1918, we, like all the other powers, have been behaving just as badly as we possibly could. Well, now, when Germany was defeated, when Germany fell, they went and they sat on Germany's head. And they kept sitting on Germany's head, although it was quite evident to any sensible person that they couldn't go on like that forever. Then there came a very intelligent gentleman named Adolf Hitler, and he, knowing perfectly well that the powers would not fight, he snapped his fingers at the Treaty of Versailles. That was what got him a vote of 95% of the whole population of Germany, even including the very people whom he'd been treating rather hardly. just exactly as if we in England had been in the same position, as if the powers had beaten us and sat on our heads. Then the first man who had the gumption to see that we might get up on our legs and defy all those old treaties, he would be the most popular man in England. There can be no peace in the world until there is peace between England, France, Germany, Russia, the United States, and all the big powers of the West. Now, take that home and think about it, and don't be frightened anymore about the Germans.
I never know exactly how to make my opinion clear, because I object to all punishment whatsoever. I don't want to punish anybody. But there are an extraordinary number of people whom I want to kill. Not in any unkind or personal spirit, but it must be evident to all of you, you must all know half a dozen people at least, who are no use in this world, who are more trouble than they are worth. And I think it would be a good thing to make everybody come before a properly appointed board, just as he might come before the income tax commissioners, and say every 5 years or every 7 years, just put him there and say, sir or madam, now will you be kind enough to justify your existence? If you can't justify your existence, if you're not pulling your weight in the social boat, if you're not producing as much as you consume, or perhaps a little more, then clearly we cannot use the big organization of our society for the purpose of keeping you alive, because your life does not benefit us, and it can't be of very much use to you.
For Mr. George Bernard Shaw, speaking at the Joint British Committee Authors' Day dinner in London in honor of Professor Einstein.
There is always a great deal to conceal. If you take the typical great man of our historic epoch, and suppose that I had to rise here tonight to propose the toast of Napoleon, well, undoubtedly I could say many very flattering things about Napoleon. But the one thing which I should not be able to say about him would be perhaps the most important thing. And that was that it would perhaps have been better for the human race if he had never been born. Napoleon and other great men of his type, they were makers of empire. But there is an order of men who get beyond that. They are not makers of empires, but they are makers of universes. And when they have made those universes, their hands are unstained by the blood of any human being on earth. Ptolemy made a universe which lasted 1400 years. Newton also made a universe which has lasted 300 years. Einstein has made a universe, and I can't tell you how long that will last.